participate. I think this is my third time here at FutureMed, and I've found it to be extraordinary. Before I start talking about Watson, I'd like to take a few minutes, if you'll let me, to kind of create a context. And one of the contexts is sort of tangential to the subject, but a few of you know that I just got back last night from Moscow, where I participated in an event called the Open Innovations Forum, sponsored by several Russian ministries and MIT Technology Review. This is a copy of the Moscow Times from Thursday, and there's a statement in here. The goal of the forum is to reformulate the technology trends into economic ones, both domestically and internationally, the forum's chief executive, Olga Moiseyeva, said in an interview. In the US, such a platform is not possible because there are two camps, Silicon Valley and everybody else. And discussions with the players that are not part of Silicon Valley are looked down upon as not substantial. So I guess we're not really here. Okay. So just interesting international perspective. So by background, I started off as an academic research biomedical engineer, went to medical school, practiced emergency medicine for 30 plus years, was a healthcare executive, background on health policy. So I kind of look at things from a variety of perspectives. So what may be a little out of step with some of the other discussions here is my view about technology is a little different. When I was 40 plus years ago, when I was a young and naive engineer and starting medical school, I thought that technology was the solution. It was the panacea. It would drive all the necessary change. I started to be a little suspicious about that during my third year of medical school, when I thought I was making a very cogent argument with a nephrologist that all of metabolic disease could be modeled with state space analysis and statistical thermodynamics. And he made it clear he wasn't interested, but I was young and naive and didn't pick up on the signal, so I persisted in trying to get him to understand my theory. And he finally turned around and said, the only state and space I'm interested in is you occupying a space on the other side of the door and not coming back. Okay. So I now believe that technology is an enabler. The transformational energy comes from people and ideas about wanting to do things better. And so we have goals, for instance, for healthcare, of the transformed vision of healthcare of the future. People get ideas of what they want it to be. We have that vision. You define paths of how you want to get there, identify the obstacles to achieving those goals, and then technology has a role as an enabler to help us overcome the obstacles. Not, let's develop the technology first, as may have been the case 40, 50 years ago, and try to find a way to make it get used. So where we are now is kind of in a mess. There is not a country in the world that is satisfied with the way it provides healthcare. And almost all people recognize that the actual goal is health, not healthcare itself. And we're not doing a very good job of achieving that. And we have some very straightforward examples of how poorly we're doing. There was a recent article last year in the Journal of the American Medical Association by Don Berwick, former commissioner of CMS, currently a candidate for the Democratic nomination for governor of Massachusetts, that talked about waste in healthcare. And in that article, depending on the assumptions you make, between 21% and 47% of what we spend on healthcare in the United States is for things of no value. Now, some of that is fraud and abuse, what I call intentional waste. But he also identified 4 other factors that contribute to that waste. Okay? One is failure of care delivery, not being able to provide care that is known to be of value for that particular patient for a variety of reasons. And one of those reasons is dissemination of information. The IOM estimated that from the time something is proven to be of value, it may take 15 years before it becomes common practice. Okay. A second point that it came up with, over-treatment, providing treatment that has no possibility of being of any benefit to the patient, another source of wasted expense. The third is lack of coordination. In fact, that different members of the healthcare team, different stakeholders, including the patient, can't work together and waste a lot of money, repeating things, for example. And third is administrative complexity. How expensive it is to deal with administration. So, for example, another article in the journal Health Affairs a couple of years ago estimated for the average American physician the cost of interacting with payers, private payers, government payers. For the typical American physician, the cost of interacting with payers is $83,000 a year. Okay, 1/6 of practice revenue goes to administrative complexity. Okay. Again, a huge waste. So our goal is to change that. And so what we want to change is sometimes described as personalized healthcare. We want to be able to make decisions that are better for you as an individual. You may be a diabetic, okay, and it may be appropriate for us to use a standard treatment for diabetes for you, but we know typically 30 to 40% of patients don't respond to standard treatments. And the way we usually find out is by trying it and having it fail and moving on. How much better it would be to get enough information about you, to learn enough about you, to make decisions that are more appropriate for you now. That would address waste, that would address outcomes, all the things that we have as goals for the future. So the goal of the future then is personalized healthcare. The goal of the future is evidence-supported decision-making, actually use evidence to make better decisions as part of the spectrum of the goals of the future. Now, there's been some discussion today of personalized healthcare, or sometimes called precision healthcare. And it seems to be like the attitude right now is it's been assumed or subsumed by the genomics community as being a strictly genomic issue. That's actually not quite true. The first article that I'm aware of that mentioned the term personalized healthcare was in July of 1968 in New England Journal, an article on individual medicine or individualized medicine, and first talk about personalized healthcare, well before genomics were a major contribution to decision-making in healthcare. So the idea has existed for a while. Genomics certainly has had a dramatic impact on it, but it is not alone. Our goal is still to make better decisions. And if you accept my premise that we will not achieve the healthcare of the future that we want without making better decisions, then it would follow that making better decisions means we need to use the information that's available to us in a practical way to help us make those better decisions for populations, for individuals. Now, using information is a challenge for a variety of reasons. One of the challenges is not everybody agrees with that concept, which to me is a little scary. So this is the summary, the introduction of a bill submitted earlier this year to the Virginia Assembly by a Virginia state senator prohibiting the use of healthcare information for analytics. Not saying we have to be concerned about privacy and security, just saying you will not do it. Now, fortunately, it was voted down in committee by 15-2 and never made it to the floor. But the technology itself isn't enough. It is a social political change that has to occur. When I was on the consulting side of IBM, we used to say that culture trumps strategy every time. If we can't change this culture, then all the technology in the world is not going to make any difference. So we need to use information, we need to use it better. Okay. The opportunity is there's huge amounts of information out there. The challenge is there's huge amounts of information out there and we don't know how to use it. So we're in a fundamentally different environment right now. I've been in healthcare for 47 years and have seen many dramatic changes, some of them perhaps trivial, some of them perhaps of great import. One of them today, and I need to warn you in advance, I sometimes look at things a little differently and see things that most other people would choose to ignore. So I work in artificial intelligence, but my colleagues tell me the closest I actually come to understanding artificial intelligence is that my intelligence is completely artificial. Okay. When Daniel showed those two brief videos on the hospital of the future in the 1950s, I think, with Kaiser, and the more recent one, there was one change that in my mind stood out. In that first one, everybody was Caucasian. In the second one, a male Caucasian showed up in that video for about 10 seconds. Okay. Totally different environment. Wouldn't have thought about that 50 years ago. Getting information 45 years ago was the challenge. Okay. Anybody here, it looks like a few people old enough to remember Index Medicus? Okay. Yeah, kind of scary, isn't it, when you think about that? It's these huge volumes of that listed articles for the previous year in hundreds of different categories with no real logic to the category. And if you wanted to collect, say, 50 articles about a subject, you might spend 2 days in the library. So getting the information was the challenge. Today, you go online and get 103,192 hits in 0.12 seconds. The challenge is, what are you going to do with that? What's valuable? What's relevant? What's nonsense? So using and understanding information are now the challenge. Okay. With dramatic change, okay, from before. So the person that we respected when I first started in healthcare 40-some years ago was somebody who kind of knew all this stuff because they'd done the reading and they remembered it. The challenge now, the person to be valued now, although remembering things is still important, is somebody who can understand and use all the information sources available to us. So that's the change we have to make. How do we use the information in this big data age to make better decisions? One component of the transformation of healthcare. So we look at this in a variety of ways. There's all different kinds of information out there. And there's been some discussions of it today. Chris, when he was talking about Stanford, is using existing data to learn information, to gain inferences they can use for an individual patient. We call that data-driven analytics. And we have methodologies for working with that. We have one similar to what Chris was talking about. We call patient similarity analytics. Describe a patient with many, many characteristics, potentially thousands of characteristics. Go out into all the information you may have available about patients, maybe if it's a large healthcare organization, maybe 10 or 15 million patients. Create a cohort of patients that are very similar to your index patient, and then draw inferences about outcomes from comparative effectiveness on that cohort. An example of data-driven analytics. The other side we call knowledge-driven analytics. It assumes the knowledge exists in literature someplace, and the challenge is finding it, getting the relevant ideas out of that reading, out of that literature, and giving it to the decision makers in a way that they can use. That's what Watson does. So imagine you're in your office and you have to make an important decision. And you're pretty sure you're knowledgeable of the area. It falls within your area of expertise. But there's always more information out there because we can't read it all. In the year 2010 alone, the National Library of Medicine cataloged 699,000 new articles. I didn't read them all. I would love to have read them all. More particularly, I would have loved to remember what I read, but I know I can't do that. But you're in your office, you're cognizant of all that information out there. You go next door to your colleague who you know is a voracious reader, and you say, Jane, maybe you can help me with this. I have this problem. I'd like to make a good decision. I have some ideas about it, but there's probably something I'm missing. Can you help me out? And she says, sure, give me a few minutes. Comes back into your office 10 minutes later and said, I just read 100,000 articles about your subject. And although you're the expert, and I'm just trying to find my way through it, I have pulled out 6 ideas, because I understand your problem. I pulled out 6 ideas from that literature. Here they are, in the order in which I think it's worthy of your considering. If you think that might be valuable, then we're talking about what Watson does for healthcare. One of the challenges in big data, besides its volume and how fast it's coming out of it, is the uncertainty in it. That's one of the characteristics of big data. It's sometimes called value, sometimes called veracity, sometimes called variability. It's uncertain, and there are some estimates by 2015, 80% of our data will be uncertain, inconsistent. So the New England Journal of Medicine says one thing, the Journal of the American Medical Association says the opposite. How do you put all that together? So dealing with big data means our traditional methods of computing, what used to be called programmatic, the era of programmatic computing, where you understood the data, you stepwise programmed your computer to deal with that data, you could look at the outcome and judge yourself whether the outcome made any sense, is gone now. We're in the area of cognitive computing, where after a fashion, the computers actually have to think and understand. So Watson was developed so that a computer could understand English and make judgments. Okay. And it showed that skill by playing Jeopardy successfully. It was not built to play Jeopardy. Jeopardy was the arena in which Watson's ability to actually understand and use English could be demonstrated. So what are some of the characteristics of Watson? Okay. It understands natural language. It actually understands the meaning, not just the words. Okay. It generates hypotheses. So like in the way it played Jeopardy, and analogous in healthcare, it understood the Jeopardy stimulus, which was an answer, understood that language was ambiguous, so generated numerous possible interpretations of that Jeopardy stimulus, and then went and read up to 200 million pages of text in 3 seconds, and came back with a list of possibilities of responses to the Jeopardy stimulus. Now, it was not apparent in the way it played Jeopardy that it actually had a list of possibilities, because the Jeopardy rules didn't allow that. Watson can say, Alex, here are 4 possibilities, you choose the one that you want. It had to come back with a single answer, so it had another set of algorithms to calculate whether it was confident enough in any of the responses to buzz it in. But in healthcare, there's no such constraint. Okay? In healthcare, very often there's not a single obvious correct answer, and there may be multiple correct answers. And so Watson comes back with ideas from understanding your question and all the reading that it does for you to consider. And it lists these ideas in the order in which it has confidence that it's relevant for your thinking. And then Watson adapts and learns over time. It learned how to play Jeopardy by playing Jeopardy. Okay? It was first fed tens and thousands of answer question pairs from previous Jeopardy programs. So it learned what the context of a correct response looked like. And then it was further developed by being given tens of thousands of Jeopardy answers and asked to come up with a question and response and told whether it was right or wrong. So it's entirely analogous in healthcare, the same machine learning process. It was fed thousands of electronic health records on patients with cancer, so it learned in its own way what appropriate therapy was, and then was fed additional thousands of cases, asked to come back with suggestions of therapy, and told by the most experienced oncologists whether they were on target or off target or missed the boat. And then it sort of self-analyzed along with help from its designers to improve its performance. So the more Watson played Jeopardy, the better it got. The more Watson plays healthcare, the better it'll get. So in the realm of cognitive computing, Watson performs 3 services. One is you can ask Watson a question in your own language. You don't have to break it down into keywords. So you can say to Watson, well, here's the electronic health record for this patient. Please read it and understand. Or I can tell Watson, I have a patient with stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer who also has renal insufficiency and psoriasis and a few other things, and is 62 years old and has these preferences for what her life should be like in the future and so on. You can feed all that into Watson in that way. Watson will go out and read potentially hundreds of thousands of articles and come back with suggestions for you. Okay? Watson is also a discovery tool. When Watson comes back with these suggestions, if you look at a suggestion, you say, that's interesting, but I'm not sure why that is relevant. If you link on that suggestion, Watson will take you back to the literature that it used to create that suggestion. So in a sense, it's the reverse of a search engine. Okay? If you use a search engine and you get your 103,000 hits in 0.12 seconds, you need to start going through all those articles or pages to see if they're relevant. And if you're anything like me, maybe you get through the first 3 pages before you give up. And typically what you'll do is so the title for that, that page or that article doesn't seem relevant, I'm going to skip that. That title might be relevant, but I look at the abstract, no, it doesn't seem like it's on target. And you go through this process, and you'll eventually come back with a few articles that you will read in their entirety, and only a small fraction of those will be relevant. Since Watson reads so fast, 65 million pages a second, it is not constrained to just looking at titles that seem relevant. So whereas your method would not let you find information that would be important for your decision that is hidden in an article with an odd title, Watson will find that because it is not constrained because of how fast it can read. And so an idea that is buried, say, in a half page or a paragraph in an article about another subject, Watson will find for you. And then when you see that suggestion, you can ask Watson to take you back to that literature. So it's a discovery tool. And it's a decision tool, and that as Watson learns over time, okay, some of its designers say Watson knows what it doesn't know. So for right now, Watson is being trained in therapy and oncology. It has learned that for certain kinds of patients, certain bits of information are critical in making a decision. And if you ask Watson a question about a patient or give this information to Watson, and that information isn't there, Watson will come back and ask for it. Okay. And this process is interactive, go back and forth. You give Watson more information, it'll ask questions, you go back and forth. So the decision maker and Watson together can zero in on a set of possibilities that are more likely to be appropriate for that question or beneficial for that patient. So there was some discussion today of the electronic health record, and that sometimes it's valuable, sometimes it's not valuable, sometimes it helps, sometimes it causes harm. Again, in my mind, that's just an example of why technology is the enabler and not the driver. There are two information theorists from Harvard, David Bates and Gordon Schiff, physicians that look at electronic health records and how they are helpful or not helpful. Okay? And they have identified several important services that electronic health records do not provide right now that we need if we're going to approach evidence-supported medicine. Okay? And one is access to information, prioritizing information. Okay? When I was in practice in the emergency department, I recall times an overnight shift, the proverbial Saturday night, Sunday morning overnight shift, get a transfer from a nursing home, a 75-year-old patient with multi-infarct dementia who can't speak, and the transfer note from the nursing home is a half page of paper that says, "Patient sick." That's all there is. I don't know if any of you have had the same kind of experience. Okay. And then so you go to your next step, you call the nursing home, and of course the nurse who transferred the patient isn't there, so you don't have any information. So then you go one step down the line, you ask for the old chart. Okay. So one of two really bad things happens when you ask for the old chart. Either there is one or there isn't one. Okay. Okay. If there isn't one, then you're on your own as just the instinctive emergency physician. If there is one, chances are it's a 37-inch stack of paper, and there's no possibility of getting the critical information about this patient out of that stack of paper in the time frame with which you have to make a decision. Okay, Watson can read through the electronic health record and, based on what has been taught, pull out that critical information in seconds. Say, you're welcome to read through the whole chart if you want, but here are 5 critical points that you ought to consider in your making decision that are from the chart and relevant to the situation you're dealing with right now. So Watson prioritizes information from the electronic health record, whereas your record itself does not do that. Okay? Watson has been taught to identify when information is missing. Electronic health records don't do that. They have a lot of information about the patient, but the electronic health record doesn't come out and tell you, this information is missing. You really need to collect this information from the patient. The electronic health record doesn't do that. Watson does that. Okay. And the electronic health record doesn't make suggestions. Okay. Watson does make suggestions using the information that was in the electronic health record. Okay. And the electronic health record doesn't provide you access to information sources that can help you make a better decision. Watson does that. So in 4 key ways, Watson provides services that Schiff and Bates think are essential for us to practice evidence-supported medicine going forward. So this is our view of knowledge-driven analytics, knowledge-driven decision support. And in particular, I want to emphasize that it's decision support. It is not decision-making. So Watson doesn't come out and say, this is the answer, act on it. Okay. That doesn't work. Watson gives you the advantage of ideas that it brings to you, the expert on the scene, to use for the final decision. Okay. Something that we all want. I would love to read every article that's out there that's relevant to a decision I have to make right now. I can't do that. Okay. We all try other kinds of ways of being more knowledgeable, subscribing to summary services that say these are the 20 most important articles in your field this month, and read through it. We do all sorts of desperate things to try to keep up, but we know we can't. Watson, in essence then, gives us the advantage of being able to read all the articles that we would like to read and remember when we make a decision, and give these ideas to us that we then use. Okay, so I can look at the ideas from Watson, and I can say possibly, you come up with 5 ideas, they're all ridiculous. So let's try again. I'm going to tell Watson these ideas are useless, and it comes back. So my feedback to Watson is important. Watson doesn't exist in isolation. So this context back and forth, giving you the advantage of access to all that information, is where Watson shines. Knowledge-driven analytics. It is part of the overall decision support and analytics objective, which includes image analytics and structured data analytics, the data-driven analytics I mentioned before. And ideally, at some point in the future, all these will be combined, again, as decision support to help us make better decisions. We're only going to be burdened with more and more information out there. The genomics revolution has guaranteed that. But even there, we need help, because you can come up with a genomic sequence for a patient, but you may not have any idea if it's of any consequence. You will need help doing all that deciphering. So Watson, as part of our goal of clinical decision support, moving towards evidence-supported decision-making, is where we are now, and I thank you for your attention.